Hello, my name is Alberto Marquez. In this video, we will discuss aggregated planning in supply chains. The key concept in supply chains is the capacity to integrate the supply chain where several participants coordinate their activities as if they were a single unit. That implies strong communication among participants. Strong communication allows for the supply chain to behave reliably. Therefore, planning for the next few months is needed in order to be able to properly communicate requirements up and down the supply chains. It facilitates the coordination among the different participants. The plans for each organization must include all the constraints and, if at all possible, remove those constraints so the organization responds efficiently and effectively to the requirements of the supply chain. Which are these requirements? The amount of product, the amount of service, and timing of delivery or development of such products and services. Which are the constraints? The current level of demand, whether if it's changing to higher, lower, or remaining the same. Is the demand seasonal? The amount of inventory required to be able to timely respond to the customer requirements. The capacity of the plant expressed as the production rate or production throughput that manufacturing facilities have. The total capacity expressed in terms of the number of available days or shifts that can be dedicated to production as opposed to, say, for instance, maintenance. The available manpower, the available raw materials, the available warehousing space, and the available transportation are also constraints. This plan, looking ahead, usually is prepared for the next 12 weeks to 6 months. The reason for that is because that is enough lead time to make adjustments at the operational level without having investment projects that require infrastructure. We will discuss all these constraints one by one. The aggregated plan is a top-down approach to planning. By top-down, it means we look at the big picture and translate the big picture into details just as much as needed to have an operational view of the future of the next 3 to 6 months. In order to have a top-down view, markets, products, facilities, and transportations are aggregated by families of products, not SKUs. Type of consumer, not SKUs. Complete fabrication plants, not SKUs, etc. Top-down aggregated planning is very traditional since it provides the most perception of control to the decision makers. However, top-down planning has some drawbacks. The major concern is that the devil is in the details. While on average the company may look to have a good position on inventory, when looking at the detail of SKUs, it may be that there is too much product of an SKU that is not needed and too little of an SKU that is very needed. There is no way to avoid this type of weakness when the decision is built from the top and expanded down into some of the details. Alternatively, there is the opportunity to perform a bottom-up planning. This would not be the traditional aggregated planning process. However, it is still useful to have reports that are aggregated from the bottom up. What do we mean added by from the bottom up? Every single detail for every single SKU, order, machine, etc. is taken into consideration. The due date for every order, the amount of product, the location to be delivered, etc. Then that information is aggregated from the details into overall numbers for production capacity, etc. Planning this way was impossible until very recently, when the availability of memory for computers and faster processing CPUs were available. The top-down aggregated was implemented on computers but actually driven by humans. The bottom-up is complicated, that requires to be driven by algorithms. We will not discuss the bottom-up approach in this video, and we will review it in detail later in the course. Now we will concentrate in understanding the constraints, that give form to the aggregate plans. Demand. The demand can be forecasted for the next 3 to 6 months. This is important because we may have contract obligations to supply our customers. If we do not deliver product, competitors may take advantage that cannot be gained back if we lose market share. A disrupted supply chain will very likely create a bullwhip effect that can be difficult to control. Another situation is if the demand is low, there is a possibility of becoming not profitable, given fixed costs do not change. However, an adequate aggregate planning can promote a reduction of what otherwise would be considered fixed cost. We need a plan that considers demand constraints. If the demand reduces below the break-even point, the company will have losses. The fixed cost depends, among other things, on the level of fixed cost. Lower fixed costs allow for lower break-even points. Inventory planning. Most manufacturing operations have lead times. One way to fight against that is to prepare ahead of the need by storing inventories. Inventories allow to provide faster response. Inventory is particularly difficult to plan because the aggregated plan does not take into consideration the details about customers and SKUs. Inventory needs to be balanced by customer types and by SKUs. A reality is that not all customers require all SKUs. Not all SKUs are equally profitable. Not all customers require large variety of parts or large volume of parts. Not all SKUs require the same limiting constraints in equipment, processes, personnel, tooling, etc. The production rate. Different locations will have different productivity measured as the product per unit of time or the quality of the product. Higher variety of SKUs require more time changing from SKU to SKU, giving higher productivity to lower variety locations. Different vendors or raw materials may have different delivery terms in price, time, and quality. Even the weather, labor, and commercial laws or the manufacturing team may be factors that affect the productivity of different manufacturing sites. The production time may have different constraints like the number of total available days or the number of shifts within each day. Similarly, every month may have different number of available weeks. This happens because of holidays and scheduled preventive maintenance. In some industries, change from one SKU to another SKU in the manufacturing lines may take hours and even days. In those cases, the idle time due to change of SKU reduces the capacity of the manufacturing facility. Some elements that can provide flexibility to production time is a request for overtime. It is important to know beforehand when will it be needed and how much, so it can be arranged and committed to the labor. Also, there may be an upper bound on the total overtime. Other variables that can be considered are layovers and part-time work, vacations, and other similar situations. Manpower, even when flexible, still have constraints. Not all positions are equivalent or require the same skills. So it is important in general how many workers per function will be needed or department on total. How many hires will we have the next few months? How many people we will lay off in the next few months? Implications for hiring and layoff processes include training and even the reputation of the company as an employer for future hiring campaigns. The plan needs to consider manpower constraints. Raw materials also have so many constraints to be considered in the planning process. Raw materials can have long delivery times. Raw materials can be critical since missing one SKU can stop the production. One famous case was the connector for a Tesla car. Suppliers may have constraints of minimum and maximum volumes to be considered. Suppliers may have their own constraint changes in production levels due to maintenance. Some suppliers could have exclusivity contracts. Warehousing. Warehousing can be a self-constraint since space is somewhat available for hiring. However, there is a lead time for the process of acquiring the warehousing capacity that works from the efficiency perspective. Of course, we cannot exceed the warehousing capacity. We can contract extra warehousing only when justified. For transportation, if warehousing is a hard limitation, shipping and transportation can be flexible to move product to other places. Also, transportation can actually become a storing pipeline that adds to faster response to customer requirements and faster response to warehousing limitations. Not all transportation is equally available to all regions and all seasons, and therefore it has to be planned ahead. Even production rate by SKU may be limited if there is not enough transportation capacity to move product from a large capacity production facility to remote warehouses. I hope this video helps to understand the nature of aggregated planning. Please let me know if you have questions or suggest videos that could be useful. Thanks.